Hello, and welcome back to Educator.com's Introduction to PHP course. In today's lesson, we're going to be talking about basic PHP syntax. We're going to be talking about specifically PHP delimiters, or PHP opening and closing tags, which is something we learned about in our Hello World example. We're going to be talking about two features of PHP language, all languages, statements and comments, and we're going to learn how to properly format them and what the proper syntax is. And we're also going to talk about what coding conventions are. It's a very important topic, and we'll review that at the end. So PHP delimiters, we already have experienced that when we wrote our Hello World example, and the delimiters are what lets the PHP interpreter know what our code is. And we've used, there are actually four types that are available in PHP. What we've used is the long form. As you can see here, it should look familiar. There are actually three other types that are allowed by PHP as well. One is known as the script form, and the other two are known as the short and ASP style forms. The script form looks like this, and this is the opening script tag, and this is the closing script tag. So basically you would have all of your PHP code inserted in this area in between them. And if you've worked with JavaScript before, these tags may look familiar to you. And this type of tag is always available in your PHP scripts. And that's opposed to the short style, or the short form, and the ASP style, which are shown here. And these are the opening tags for those forms and the closing tags. And the reason the short tags and the ASP style tags are only sometimes available is you can configure PHP to allow the use of these tags or not. So for example, you can configure it to allow short tags and maybe not allow ASP tags. So actually, if we go and look at a code, some code called a file called delimiters.php, we can see each of these four types of tags in action. Hopefully, yeah, they all fit on the screen here. We can see the long form that we've used before. We can see the script form. We can see the short form and the ASP form. So we know that these two, as mentioned, are always enabled. So the code within these should run fine. And sometimes the short form is enabled, and sometimes the ASP style is enabled. It depends on the configuration. So let's load the file up view it in our web browser and see what happens. So we go to delimiters.php. And what we can see is that the long form and the script form worked. They echoed the statements as they were supposed to. The short form also processed the echo statement, so that worked as well. However, it looks a little weird down here with the ASP style code. And so it looks like they didn't process that. It looks like the ASP style tags are disabled currently. So actually, and you can even, if you actually go and look at the source code, blow it up a little bit, you can actually see that PHP didn't even recognize the code in between the ASP style tags as PHP code, and actually just printed it directly to output, which is what you can see here. It actually printed out our code. Now the way to enable that is through a configuration file called php.ini. And what php.ini is a global configuration file for a particular PHP installation. It contains what are known as configuration directives, which are basically key value pairs that control how PHP functions. For example, for the directive for whether short tags are enabled or not is the directive short_open_tag. And that's sort of the property, and then you set a value to it. You can set it either to on or off. So php.ini actually has a directive for both short tags, enabling short tags, and enabling ASP tags. So as we can see, or as we just saw, the short open tags are enabled in PHP right now, and the ASP tags aren't. So if we go look at php.ini, we should be able to confirm that. And in XAMPP, it actually depends on how your PHP installation is set up, where your php.ini file is located. But for XAMPP, it's located by default in the PHP directory under your XAMPP installation directory. So if we go and browse there, go to the XAMPP directory, go to PHP, and we want to select the PHP INI file to view. And I'm actually going to select to open it with PSPad, our familiar editor. And this is a PHP INI file, and this is what it looks like. You can see there's a lot of text in here, and basically what these are comments to you, the user, about how the configuration directives work in the file. These aren't actually configuration directives, they're comments, and the way you denote a comment in the INI file is by using a semicolon. So all this here is comments. And until we scroll down till here, we reach our first directive. In this case, the directive is called engine. And it's a property, and you can set the value. We're not going to talk about that one today, but we are going to talk about the two we mentioned before, the short open tag directive and the ASP tags directive. Now, as you can see, there's actually two short open tag directives in here, and that's intentionally done by XAMPP. I'm not exactly sure why they chose to do that way. It's sort of typically bad form to have the same directive listed twice. But essentially what happens when you do list something twice, just so you understand what's going on, is the configuration takes on whatever the last value was given in the script. So up here we have short tags set open to off, but then XAMPP added a directive, the same directive, and set it to on. So the final value for open tags is going to be on, which is what we saw in our file. The short tags worked. Now as we look down here at the ASP tags, we can see it's off. And we can expect that because our ASP tags didn't work. So let's go ahead and set that to on. And we're going to save the file. And if we go back and browse to our file again and refresh it, we should see everything. And actually it refreshed and it didn't change everything. The ASP tags still aren't working. And actually did that on purpose, and the reason was to let you know that anytime you make changes to the PHP INI file using in an XAMPP installation, you actually have to restart Apache for the configuration changes to take place, and that's because Apache in XAMPP, or in this the default XAMPP installation, runs as a module. So we're going to open up the XAMPP control panel. We're simply going to stop the Apache server by clicking on stop and click start again. Take a few seconds and it'll reboot the server. Now when we go back and load our page and refresh it, the ASP style tags work. And as you can see, they've worked. And if we look back at the page source, you can see that the ASP code that was just simply output before has now actually been processed, and the echo statements were processed. So one other thing to note related to PHP INI is there's a function that's built into PHP called PHP info. And we haven't talked about functions yet. It's sort of an advanced concept, and it's something that we'll get to later in the class. But essentially what a function is it's an identifier that tells the PHP interpreter to go off and execute another branch of code or another section of code located somewhere else. Now, in this class, we're going to learn how to define our own functions, but PHP actually has its own built-in functions, which are defined elsewhere as part of the PHP code base. And so it automatically knows how to find those. So just by including this function name in our code, we'll be able to make use of the function. And what the function PHP info does is it is used to output your current configuration. So we have a file here called PHP info, and it's actually just a solid PHP file. There's no HTML. We have our PHP opening and closing tags, and then we just have the PHP info function. And you need to follow that by a semicolon. And as we'll see in the next slide, we're going to talk about statements and the importance of semicolons. So this is how you call the PHP info function. If we go and load this up in our browser, this is the output that we get. And as you can see, there's a lot of information that it outputs for you. It outputs things about how your computer's configured, how Apache is configured, most specifically how PHP is configured, as well as its extensions. And so what we want to do is we can actually, using info, we can see whether short tags and ASP tags are enabled. So there's a lot of information here, but the section we're going to scroll down to is called core. And these are sort of the core directives that are part of the all PHP installations. And if we look here, we can see the ASP tags property or directive, and we can see that its value is set to on. And you can see there's actually a master value and a local value. The PHP INI file configures the master value. Local value is used for some of the properties and directives within the PHP INI file can sort of be changed on the fly and using other configuration files. So even though the master value might be on, you could maybe temporarily disable it using an advanced configuration file, which is something we're not going to be using in this introductory course. And not all directives are able to be overridden, so you can't always override the value in the PHP INI file. So as expected, ASP tags is on, and these are the directives are listed in alphabetical order. So if we go down and look for the short open tag directive, we can see that is on as well. And so that's what we expected, and as you can see, PHP info lets us know that. So actually, let's go back and alter the PHP INI file so that both ASP tags and short open tags are off. And if we go ahead and stop our Apache server and restart it, reload PHP info, and if we scroll down to the core section again, we can see that ASP tags are now turned off, and also open tags are both turned off. So if we were to go back and view our original file, we can see that actually neither of the short tags or the ASP style tags work. And if we look at the page source, you can see that PHP just simply outputted all of the content in between the short tags and the ASP style tags, and it didn't process it. And for this reason, it's not recommended that short tags or ASP style tags be used, and it's for portability reasons. And because on one configuration, PHP can be set up so that it allows the short tags or allows the ASP style tags, and on another configuration it might not be. So you might develop your PHP code for a website on your home computer and you allow short tags. But then you go ahead and you decide to make it live, you upload it to your web host, and your web host has them disabled, and you're not able to change the configuration file, which may be the case at your web host. In that case, in order to get your PHP scripts to work, you're going to have to go through and change all of the opening tags and closing tags to the appropriate form, whether it be the script form or the long form. And so, in essence, what that does is it reduces what's called portability, and that's being able to move your code from different installation to installation without having to change it. So for that reason, these two forms are not recommended. So which form to use then? Should you use then? Because there's two left that are always available. There's the long form and the script form. As you can probably guess, because in all of our scripts so far we've used the long form, that's the recommended form. And the reason for that is that it's XHTML and XML compliant. And because XHTML particularly is becoming more popular, by using the long form of the PHP tags, you'll be able to insert PHP code within your XHTML files and have it still be compliant XML or XHTML. For that reason, we're going to always use the long form, and that in general is the recommended form, even by PHP, and is pretty much the standard that's used out there. The second one that you'll see most often is the short tags, and they've used a lot in the past, but it's changed and moved to the long form for reasons such as the XML, well, not XML compliance, but for reasons because there's some security bugs with them, which is why PHP created the ability to turn them on and off. So let's talk a little bit about statements now. What statements is something just like the PHP info function we just had, or an echo statement. They're individual instructions to the PHP interpreter that need to be executed. And the way you separate statements in PHP, the syntax that you use is through semicolons. And semicolons are what delineate one statement from the next, and that's how PHP knows that. So if we actually go and look at a file called statements.php. We can see it's as some of the files we've seen before, it's a mixture of HTML and PHP. And within the body tag of the HTML, we have a PHP code block using the long form of the PHP open and closing tag. And you can actually see we have 4 echo statements here. And each echo statement is separated by a semicolon. And actually, this one's off the screen, but if you scroll down to the end, you can see there's a semicolon there as well. That lets PHP know that once it reaches the end of this line and hits a semicolon, that echo statement is done. It'll start processing the next line and a new instruction, which in this case is an echo statement. So if we actually go and view this in our browser, we can see that all of the statements were properly output. And this sort of spells it out, all of the statements were separated by semicolons in the PHP code. And the reason is that that semicolon, again, lets the PHP know that you have separate statements and there's different instructions. So for example, if we came back and we deleted the semicolon, saved the file, and tried to review it again in our browser, we're going to get an error from PHP. And basically it's saying it's expecting a semicolon and that there's an error on line 10. And if we go back and look, it's not actually line 10. Sometimes the error messages are off by a line or two for different kind of complicated reasons. And we can see that PHP threw an error because it didn't recognize that we had 2 statements. It saw basically when it didn't find the semicolon here, it saw this all as one statement, and that's not the proper format for an echo statement. So now I want to talk about comments. We have statements in your code, which are code that gets executed by PHP. Comments are text that you add to your PHP code within the PHP code block that are not interpreted by the PHP interpreter and are used as basically an aid to the programmer. They are information that you encode in your PHP file that gives information about how the code works, what it does, along with a lot of other useful information. And as mentioned, PHP does not process the comments. It does not execute them. It just ignores them completely. Now in PHP, there are a couple of different styles or ways to, or syntaxes for defining comments in your code. Single line comments, which are comments that just span one line, can be delimited or started with the 2 forward slashes or the £. And when using these style of comments, everything after the 2 forward slashes or the £, until either the end of the line is reached or a PHP closing tag is reached, are treated as comments. There's also a third style of comment known as a multi-line comment, which are also called C-style comments. And basically, because they span multiple lines, you need to be able to delineate the start and end to them. And so PHP has a starting delimiter, which is a forward slash followed immediately by an asterisk, and an ending delimiter, which is an asterisk followed by a forward slash. And basically, all text between those 2 character sequences are treated as comments. So let's take a look at comments in action. Here we have another simple HTML and PHP combination file. And within our PHP code block, we want to have some comments. And right here, this is an example of a single line comment using the forward slashes. And for those of you that may be familiar with C++, this is known as a C++ style of comment. This right here is an example of a single line comment in what's called Perl style that some of you may be familiar with, as it's a style used in other programming languages. In this course, we're actually only going to be using the C++ style, as that's the more commonly used variety, and it's what you'll see in most places. So we will not be using the £, for our single line comments. Now, single line comments can be on a line all by themselves, as in here, as in this comment itself, and also as in this line right here. So we actually have down here an echo statement, hello world, and we want to add a comment to it that says this statement outputs hello world. Now that's not, in this case, a particularly useful comment because it's a very simple thing that we're doing in the echo statement. But as you'll see, as your code base grows and you end up having PHP files that are hundreds of lines long, these comments are going to become very useful to you to figuring out what you were doing in your code, because sometimes you might work on your code and you won't have a bug that comes up for maybe a month, and then when you go back to look at your code to figure it out, the comments are there to help you understand what's going on. So this is a single line comment on its own line. You can also place single line comments on the same line as a statement or PHP code, and you do that by just placing it after the PHP code. And this is also known as sort of an inline comment. And as mentioned, everything from the / until the end of the line, which would be here, or a PHP closing tag is reached, are interpreted as comments. So if you look here, you can actually see we have 3 single line comments, and in this one we actually have a PHP closing tag. So what's going to happen is when PHP is processing this file, it's going to go through, process the echo statement. It's going to see this is a comment, this is a comment, this is a comment, and this last line here is a comment. And so everything until the end of the line or until a closing tag is reached is a comment. So PHP ignores all this. Then it reaches the closing tag. And so what actually happens is at that point it jumps out of PHP mode. So all of the rest of the code that was in our file, which we're going to look at in a minute, is no longer treated as PHP code because you've actually escaped out of PHP mode. So if we actually go and run this file, or sorry, view this file in our web browser, we can see that everything after that PHP closing tag was simply output. So as you can see, we have the closing tag here, is reached, is the text that was afterwards, and there was more text in the rest of the file, and that was simply output as is because we've jumped out of PHP mode. So now let's talk about multi-line comments, and I'm going to go ahead and remove this so the rest of the file works. Multi-line comments are also called C-style comments. For those of you that are familiar with the C programming language, look like this in code. They start with this character sequence here and end with this character sequence here, and it's for comments that span typically for comments that span multiple lines, and basically PHP treats everything between those two comment sequences as a comment. Now, one thing you need to be careful about is nesting comment sequences. What that means is if you have or nesting multi-line comments. If you have one multi-line comment that goes from here to here, let's say, and you actually had another comment within it, let's say we wanted to add a comment here, what's going to happen is this part after this nested comments ending tag is no longer going to be treated as a comment, and it's actually going to throw an error. And the reason for that is because the rule is that PHP treats everything from here, from this sequence, until the next sequence of an asterisk and a / as comments. When it comes across the nested comments / it's going to stop and say this is no longer a comment, and it's going to start treating this right here as code, which is invalid code. So actually, if we go and run this file, we're going to get an error. And it says that you get an error on line 39. And if we go back and look at our code on line 39, here we have our error. So I'm just going to remove this now so that the error is deleted. And wanted to make one other comment about multi-line comments. And the multi-line comment style can also be used for single-line comments. For example, this is a comment that just spans one line, but it uses the multi-line comment style. And the reason for that is that sometimes you want to make a single-line comment stand out, and maybe you've been using, for example, the / style for all of your comments. By creating it with the multi-line style, it may make an important point stand out, and so that's what they can be used for as well. So now I want to talk about a very important topic called coding conventions. And what coding conventions are a set of rules for how your code should be formatted and written. And specifically, it's rules that are not enforced by the language. For example, we learned that PHP enforces that statements have to be ended with a semicolon. That's part of the PHP syntax. We learned that comments have to be started with 2 forward slashes, or multi-line comments need to be enclosed in the forward slash and asterisk character sequences. If we don't follow those rules, PHP is going to complain, give us an error, and our code's not going to work. But there are other rules that we can apply to our code that PHP won't care about. For example, we could put all of our statements on the same line. As long as they're separated by semicolons, PHP is going to treat them as individual statements, and it doesn't care that they're not on separate lines. However, to make the code easier to read, we're going to want to put statements on separate lines. And that's one of the main purposes of coding conventions, is to make your code easier to read, understand, maintain, and debug. So when you go back and look at your code later, if you see 3 statements, 3 echo statements, for example, all on one line, it's a little bit harder to read than if they were on a separate line, and so it makes the code easier to read. And again, coding conventions can only be enforced by the programmer and not the language itself, so it's very important that the programmer make sure to use these rules. And there are actually many different coding conventions that are available out there and have rules for all sorts of different things: how to format your comments, how many statements you can have on a line, things like that. And which convention you use is not so much as important as the fact that you consistently apply the convention that you choose. And so the conventions we're going to be using in this course, I'm going to go over in this file called codingconventions.php. And one of the first conventions is regarding the PHP delimiters. As mentioned, in our PHP code for this course, we're only going to be using the long form of the PHP delimiters. And this sort of really emphasizes the point of why coding conventions are important, because let's say we allowed either the long form or the script form. Now when a person, maybe we wrote some code and we have another person on our team that goes back to edit the code. Now when they go through a particular PHP file looking for PHP code, if they don't know that we've, for example, allowed the script version of PHP delimiters to be used, when they're quickly browsing through the file, anything they see in a script tag they may just ignore and overlook, whereas everything between the long form will stand out. So what we do is, by making the convention to always use the long form, that way the programmer will sort of be able to key in quickly on exactly what the PHP code is. Again, PHP allows you to use either the script form or the long form of the PHP tags, and it's not going to complain, but by convention, which is something you enforce, it allows yourself to make the code easier to read and understand. And again, it's something you have to enforce on your own. So for statements, we're going to use the convention of having each statement on its own line, or having them separated by new lines. So for example, these 2 echo statements are on separate lines, and that's using our convention. Against the convention is to have multiple statements on the same line. And the reason for that is a readability reason, and this is a common convention used out there. We also have conventions for for comments and how comments should be used. Basically, for the single line comments, you should always have a space between the 2 forward slashes in your comment. So this comment right here is using the convention. This comment without the space is against the convention. This is just a readability thing, and it's also a common convention that's out there on the web. And again, whatever convention you choose to use on your own, just be consistent in whatever you use. Additionally, if we use an inline single line comment, which is a single line comment after some PHP code, put a space between the semicolon or the end of the statement in your comment, because again, if we took out that space, it makes it a little harder to read, and also if we took out the space here, it makes it even a little bit harder to read. So that's why we have these conventions. In this course, we'll always have a space after the 2 forward slashes, and always a space after the semicolon for inline comments. Multi-line comments are a little more complex as far as the convention that we're going to use. This is actually the required form for multi-line comments. You just need to have this starting comment sequence and this ending comment sequence, and everything in between is treated as a multi-line comment. However, the style that we're going to use is actually down here. And what the style dictates is that the opening of the comment, or the beginning of the comment, actually starts with a / followed by 2 asterisks instead of 1, and that opening sequence is on a line all by itself. Additionally, the closing sequence is the same, but it's also on a line by itself. And basically the comments go on every line in between, and before each line of text in your comment you have an asterisk and a space. And you want all of the asterisks to line up with the first asterisk of the opening tag. Fortunately, this seems a little, it'd be hard to line all these things up. Fortunately, PSPad, one of the nice things of it being sort of an editor, a text editor with added features, will automatically help you to format multi-line comments. And actually, if you're in PHP code in PSPad, which we are, if actually you just type a / followed by 2 asterisks and hit the Enter key, you can see it already has started to format a comment for you. So you can say comment line 1, and you hit Enter, and it adds an asterisk and a space for the next one, comment line 2. And then to finish the comment, you just add the / to the last asterisk. And so we have the opening comment sequence on its own line and the closing comment sequence on its own line. Additionally, single line comments, which we mentioned, can also use the multi-line style, which is the / and the asterisk, follow a similar convention. And it's almost the same as the required convention, except that we start with a / followed by 2 asterisks, as we had done up here for the multi-line comments. And again, this is just a common convention that's out there, is very popularly used, and so we're going to be using it in this course. And you actually can see that because of the syntax highlighting in PSPad, it actually lets you know when you've formatted a comment according to convention, because right now this comment is blue. And if we go ahead and just made it a regular regular multi-line comment without the extra asterisk, and we save it, we can see that PSPad turned it to gray. So PSPad also helps us out in this regard, and it lets us know if our comments are not formatted correctly, or formatted according to convention. Because as far as PHP is concerned, you can do it either way, but you want to follow convention. A last thing that I want to talk about in a coding convention that we're going to use in this course is regarding the indentation of your code. And this is something that's going to come up all throughout this course as we introduce different code structures in the PHP language. And basically, what the code indentation convention that we're going to use is that anytime you open a block of PHP code with opening and closing tags, you want to have the opening and closing tags lined up on the same indent, and you want to have all your PHP code within those tags one indent further inward. So these are the opening tags are lined here, so we actually have a tab in between here to begin our code. So this code section right here is formatted according to convention. This code down here is not. We can see that the code within the PHP block is lined up at the same indent as the opening and closing tags. And hopefully you can see that it's not as clean of a look. It makes it a little harder to read. And so that's why the indentation is used, is to make things easier to read. I mean, you could even go back and put these all the way back here if you wanted to. PHP is not going to complain because it's something that's legal. But by convention, you don't want to do that because it's not going to be easy to read. So we're going to have them look like this, and that's the convention for this course. So now I want to talk about a homework challenge that we're going to give you to try some of the material that we've learned in today's lesson. Basically what I want you to do is replicate some of the things that we did today. I'm going to have you create a PHP info file, or PHP info.php file, only containing what we had in our course today, which was the PHP delimiters and the PHP info statement, the PHP info function in a statement. And that means that when you use PHP info, you actually have to have a semicolon afterwards. So remember to use that. And that'll allow you to see how your current configuration is set up. Also want to have you save it in a folder called Lecture 5 in the Intro to PHP folder within your document root, and you'll be able to access it through this URL here. And again, the reason for that, mentioning that, is just to sort of reinforce the concept we've been learning about how URLs on a local web server match up to the actual files located on your hard drive. So once you see your configuration, you can see if short tags and ASP tags are enabled. You can open up the PHP ini file in PSPad like we did today. And again, it's located in the PHP folder of the XAMPP installation directory. And assuming you have the default setup, by default in XAMPP 1.7.4, which is what we standardized in this course, short tags are enabled, as we saw, and ASP tags are enabled. So I'd like you to find the ASP tags directive, change its value to on, save the file, go ahead and restart Apache, and then when you look at the PHP info file, you should be able to confirm that the changes took place. And then I want you to go back and also disable the short tags and the ASP tags, because as mentioned, those are not recommended tags and we're not going to be using them in this course. And that's also going to give you sort of a second opportunity to practice playing with the PHP ini file. And again, after you make changes to the ini file, you're going to restart Apache in order for those changes to take place. Also, I have a second homework challenge for this lesson. And what I'm going to have you do is create a file called lecture5-hw.php. It's basically just a name for a Lecture 5 homework. And within that file, create an HTML sort of skeleton, which is HTML opening and closing tags, head tags, title tags, and body tags. And within the HTML body, want you to escape into PHP mode using the long form of the PHP. Using the long form of the PHP delimiters. And I want you to create 3 echo statements and make sure that they're all on separate lines and that they're indented one indent deeper than the opening and closing tag. I also want you to add a comment for each statement, for each echo statement. I want you to do one with the style of single line comments on their own line, an inline single line comment, which is a single line comment after code on the same line as code, and also using a multi-line comment that spans several lines. And make sure that each comment you have is formatted according to the conventions we talked about. And also practice letting PSPad help you format your multi-line comments. And then after you do this, view your script in your browser to ensure that only the contents of your echo statements and not, specifically not your comments appear. Because if your comments were not properly delimited with forward slashes or the / asterisk, PHP is not going to interpret them properly, and they may appear in your output. So make sure that you've done that right. And basically what this little exercise is going to do is it's going to give you practice learning how to format comments according to convention, and it's also going to teach you up here in this step how to follow the rules of statements, the convention of statements all being on one line, as well as indentation. Then, after as we had done in class today, after your first echo statement, I want you to remove the semicolon and save it and rebrowse to it, and you should see an error with the line number. And the line number specified, take note of that, and you go back to that line number in your file. So, for example, maybe it said, if we took out this line here, it might say the error was on line 9. Let's browse the file. Actually, it's saying it's on line 10. And the reason for that is because it sees this as all one statement, and so it sees the error is occurring when the statement ends, which is line 10. But if you note the line number, you'll go back and you'll be able to see where the error is approximately. And I'm going to have you do what's known as commenting out. And this is a common debugging practice, and it's a way to narrow down errors in your code when you're experimenting with them. And basically what you do is you just put 2 forward slashes at the beginning of the line, and what that does is, as we know, it has PHP treat everything afterwards as a comment. So this is no longer an echo statement. Now what that should do is no longer cause an error, assuming that's where the error was, which we actually know it was. And if we go back and browse the page again, we can see that the error didn't happen. It also, at the same time, didn't output the echo statement because we had commented out. So then I'll just have you go back and uncomment the echo statement and review things to make sure that they all work right. Whoops. Forgot to add the semicolon back. And everything works. And the reason for this is, for this example of removing the semicolon, is to learn how PHP errors are sort of work and how they're, what information they provide to you, and also to learn the concept of commenting out code, which is a common debugging practice in PHP and in fact all programming languages. So that ends today's lecture. Thank you for watching educator.com, and we look forward to seeing you next time.